Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amanda Ho, and I'm the co-founder of Regenerative. I'm so excited to be here today and explore why we must move beyond sustainability to regenerative travel in order to protect our planet for future generations to come. As planes ground to a halt and the travel industry effectively came to a standstill, we reflected on the basic notion of why we travel and how we travel. We realized that there is an urgent call to repair and replenish the damage that we've done not only to our environment, but our communities. How can we do things better? How can we make the necessary changes to improve the conditions of life for all stakeholders? The answer is regenerative travel. And first of all, what is regenerative travel? We will deep dive into that question today with our four experts and discuss the 5 core principles of regeneration, as we've recently outlined in our recently released white paper. I'm pleased for you to meet our 4 panelists, who will each share a brief introduction about themselves and their work, and then we will begin the panel. If you have any questions during the panel, please put your questions into the Q&A chat, and we will answer them throughout the session. Bill, would you mind introducing yourself and tell us a brief introduction about who you are and what you do?
Okay, do you want me to go right into the question, or are we going to introduce?
Just your background, please.
Okay, well, I'm Bill Reed with the Regenesis group out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm an architect and planner and ecologist. And I think the best way to define what we do is just our simple tagline: we partner people with their places to heal ecosystems and the human spirit. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you. And Anna, would you mind sharing next?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Anna Pollock, obviously. I'm phoning in from England, where I now live, but I'm also a Canadian citizen. I was born in England, but adopted Canada for a while. Most of my career, which is now 4 decades long, I've been working in tourism, having had the privilege of starting out in Canada when they were developing tourism on the West Coast. And I've really done virtually everything with respect to destination tourism. But the last 10 years, I've been focusing very much on really thinking through what kind of new operating model we're going to have to develop if we're going to thrive into the future. And that's what led me to regeneration and Regenesis, and now regenerative travel. My company is Conscious Travel, and we now are really focusing on how to help people understand what regeneration is all about. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Anna. Portia?
Hi, so my name is Portia. I'm another Brit, but also Trinidadian. And I'm living in Cartagena, Colombia, where I've been for the past 6 years. Here, I'm the co-owner of 2 very small hotels, one on an island and one in the historic city, and also the co-founder of a non-profit, which we actually started to solve a waste issue. And that's focused on creating jobs through the intelligent management of recyclable waste that is otherwise ignored by the authorities and businesses for not being profitable enough. I'm no expert either in sustainability or regeneration, but I think I represent a new generation of small business owners who believe that there must be a better way. I agree with Anna that it's all about looking at new structures, new systems, be they economic or small business related, and proving that viable businesses have to be viable both socially and also environmentally, and not just financially.
Thank you, Portia. And last but not least, Beks, would you like to share?
Thank you, Amanda. As Amanda says, my name is Beks Ndlovu, and I'm the founder of African Bush Camps, and also the co-founder of African Bush Camps Foundation, which are organizations that we started 16 years ago in the form of private guided safaris and safari tented camps in remote parts of Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Zambia. We have an operational base out of Cape Town, which is our sales and marketing engine. And I am based in Cape Town and move around within the region, of course, lending a hand in developing our camps, which we've had the pleasure of developing 15 camps over the last 16 years, and we're just about to launch our 16th camp in Botswana. My background and experience is that of a professional safari guide, and it's through my experiences of traveling throughout Africa on private guided safaris that my ex-wife and I began the journey of African bush camp 16 years ago with our first safari camp in Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Beks. That's so exciting. Well, Bill, I want to start with you because you know you really go back to the genesis of regenerative travel. Oh, I think we just lost Bill.
He's back.
Oh, he's back. Are you there, Bill?
Yeah, dropped off.
All good. I want to start with you because you really go back to the original genesis of regenerative travel, working with David to help develop Playa Viva. So can you tell us what is the difference between regeneration and sustainability, both in just a general context and then moving into the travel context?
All right, well, I could talk 2 hours about that, but give me the hook,
Yes,
and everybody else
please.
jump in. So actually, sustainability requires regeneration. You cannot be sustainable without regenerating our relationships with life. So the question is, what is our focus of sustainability or focus of regeneration? And that is, how are human beings in relationship with the living systems, the soil, the animals, the birds, the air, the water that supports us? Sustainability, unfortunately, has become dumbed down to practice efficiency, basically reducing the damage, recycling your bathroom towels, for instance, in a hotel. Well, that's nice and it's an important thing, but it doesn't do nearly, doesn't help us to engage with the systems that we actually need to care for. So I think in terms of the context for regenerative travel, I like the word recreation. And you know, we go to recreate when we go to places to visit and see and relax. But recreation requires a reciprocal relationship with life, with a culture, and the life that's uniquely part of each place. So the opportunity in regenerative travel is to actually draw on the unique culture and living systems in that place and help it express itself to its full innate potential. Now that's a lot of jargon, but basically, how do you actually support the life that wants to express itself fully, to evolve in that place, and what is our role in doing so? I will stop there because I'm probably digging a hole. So let anybody else jump in.
Amanda, if I can, I think from a practical point of view, and especially if there are hoteliers and travelers on this session, one of the ways that we define it for ourselves when we're making day-to-day decisions is sustainability is quite a passive, or has come to mean something quite passive. It's just, you know, continuing the status quo. And I think if you're trying to make a decision, should I travel to this place, or if I'm a business owner, should I buy this product or should I offer this activity? You can ask yourself, you know, is this going to actively make something better? And I think it is quite dumbed down. But when you think about regeneration versus sustainability, it really feels like I'm not just not going to put a plastic straw in this drink. I'm actually going to think about, where are the fruit from that are going into this drink? Where did the alcohol come from? Who's the person who's serving it? How is it priced? And you think, does each one of those things play a role in actively improving a local community, in improving a local ecosystem, in supporting your local ecology? So I think from a practical point of view, that's just a tool that we use, which may be wrong or right, but it certainly helps us to not get muddled up between the two.
Yeah, one of the things about we have to be careful about making things better and regenerating, because we can actually apply our own perspective on what better is, and that can actually be inappropriate. So we really have to draw on the place itself, and that's what's really wonderful about regenerative tourism, is it is focused on place. And in fact, it's the market you want to emphasize, right? The uniqueness of that culture and ecosystem. So how do you allow that and work with its innate nature, not imposing our idea of what is good on it?
Yeah, true. Sorry, bad choice of word.
No, it's all fair,
but nuanced.
I like what you both said, and particularly I think about it in the context of our industry of safari camps, safari lodges throughout Africa. I think sort of in the new wave of the last 20 years, everybody has sort of coined the phrase sustainable tourism, sustainability. And I think if we can maybe agree that sustainability has become the norm, something that we must expect to practice in reality. And the next phase, which we've entered into over the last 10 years, and certainly we should be all amassing to try and achieve is regeneration, because we do know that that is going that much deeper in terms of what are the results or what are the consequences of our sustainable practices and exercises that we're doing. Why are we doing this? And are we getting out of it what we need in order to regenerate? And that whole regenerative process, certainly in our field of nature-based tourism, we all know that part of why we're reaching extinction with certain animals or certain species, even of flora, is because of habitat destruction. What is our role today in making sure that we can begin to actually restore and replenish those ecosystems in order for us to continue doing what we're doing?
Thank you, Beks.
Okay, I'll chime.
Anna, yes, Anna, I would love to hear from you as well.
Well, I'll chime in. I think people have covered many aspects of this, and I understand Portia's position about starting with the idea of doing things better. That's a qualitative improvement. And that's useful in the travel industry because the emphasis has been very much on quantitative growth. So you're shifting that focus away from just numbers and quantity and bigger to improving something qualitatively. But I think the real distinction that Bill has alluded to is that you can make a machine better. You can write better software for a software program, for example. We can do better can be applied to both machines and living things. But regeneration implies that generation very much implies that we're dealing with living systems, living beings. And and a lot of the examples that you gave, Portia, but in most cases, what you were doing is, which is great, is you were expanding our view of what the hotel's position in a living system. So you're not just asking what's good for the bottom line of the hotel. It's like, how can we improve or make better the life around us? So for me, the distinguishing feature between regeneration and sustainability is regeneration is literally breathing life back into what right now is a dying system. And it's a dying system because we've tended to perceive it as a dead machine that we have to fine tune and operate more efficiently. And Bill mentioned that word, I think, efficiency. Efficiency also relates to mechanics and how do you get more output for less input, etc. Whereas you wouldn't talk about your best friend, well, she's really efficient. You would say she's flourishing, but you wouldn't say she's efficient. So it's that, hopefully not too subtle, but that's how I begin to understand the differences.
Thank you, Anna. I think that's a great segue to my next question for you is, why is regeneration a paradigm shift and how do we achieve this paradigm shift?
That's partly why I held back my response, because it does in fact lead into this. Yeah, we've got to really sharpen up our understanding of what these different words mean. A lot of writers right now are talking about, oh, it's a mindset shift, and it's far deeper than that. What is a mindset? A mindset is a sort of pattern of thinking. So some people go around thinking that they're limited, they can't do it, they'll never be able to do it. Other people have this expansive growth mindset. That's one way of describing a mindset. A paradigm is a much bigger mindset, if you like. It's not personal, it's not individual, although we each hold one, but it goes much deeper. It affects the way the entire culture sees the world. And as I alluded to in the previous response, I would argue that we have been literally brainwashed into a pattern of thinking that sees the world as separate from us, that sees each of us as separate from one another, but also is using all of these mechanical metaphors, so that the Earth is not a living system, but it's almost like a machine. In fact, that thinking dates back to Newton. So that gives one comfort, because you can predict how the parts of a machine, which are parts, are separate, operate, and you can try and control them. Whereas now we understand that the Earth is a living system. It too is organizing itself. And all of us are part of that living system, when systems nested within systems. And where we should be drawing our lessons from now is less from physics, mechanical physics, and more from the natural world, because nature is that living system. So a paradigm is a shared set of values and beliefs that shapes how we make sense of our world and how we act in it. And tourism has borrowed that industrial production and consumption operating model based on that paradigm. The wonderful opportunity with regeneration is that it enables us to start to see ourselves as living beings in a living system and learning from nature how to work, because she's been doing it for 3.8 billion years and she's got a lot to teach us.
And I
I
would
hope that
add,
answers the question.
oh,
Yeah.
Yes,
I hope
no,
you will add
that's
to it, Bill, please.
oh, well, it was great. You know, it's just some subtle points is the real shift in our culture, at least from a management perspective, is learning to work with emergence rather than command and control. And that's in the mechanical analogy of, you know, I can control this. Well, you can never control anything. So why do we, you know, but it's really surfing those waves, which means we have to pay attention, which means we actually continually need to practice this. And that's an important point about regeneration. Often this word is confused with generation. And so the is really important here, because like many indigenous peoples, they're rebirthing a relationship. How did we do this here? Oh, that we screwed that up. That really went well. How do we adjust to meet evolutionary conditions? Then we're staying in the game of evolution, which is critical.
Thank you, Bill. And actually, I just saw a question come in on our chat, and actually that's what I'm about to talk about next with you, Portia. As standard bearer for Regenerative Travel, you are leading the charge on the Hotel Collections View data collection program and benchmarking system. Why do we need measurable data to better inform the concept of whole systems thinking, which is the regenerative principle that says that regeneration is an all-encompassing approach that says everything ultimately is interconnected?
Well, I think Anna and Bill kind of led into this perfectly. The concept of regeneration, not generation, the concept of not better according to your own point of view. And really the only way that we can ever understand how we fit into something is by observing it. And the world, as we pointed out, has been going on for a lot longer than any of our lifespans, than any of our businesses' lifespans, even the longest and most successful of businesses. And the only way to really have a sense of where we are and what's happening around us on a long-term level is by collecting data. And everyone kind of rolls their eyes when we talk about data, or they get panicked. But if you don't know where you are and you don't know what's happening around you, then it's very difficult for you to really know whether what you're doing is having a positive impact and is achieving what you're setting out to do. And I think the other thing that I've seen, obviously in the last sort of 6 to 8 months, working alongside lots of the hoteliers in regenerative travel in the collection, has been that there is a lot of best practice with regards to conservation, ecology, responsible approach to the environmental management of our properties. And I think perhaps when we begin to look at the data, especially against the backdrop of the global pandemic and then a lot of the civil unrest that we saw in 2020, we began to realize that if you're not paying attention to the data, you can actually miss an entire section of something which is a part of our ecosystem. And I think Anna says very correctly, we've been brainwashed into thinking that we almost sit outside of the natural world. And of course we don't. Humans are a part of the global ecosystem. We are a part of nature. And we need to pay attention to human data as well. And I think that one of the things that we've seen with the 50 or so properties that we're working with is all of us taking a step back and saying, perhaps I haven't focused enough on the human side of things and the social equality side of things and the way we treat people, not just our employees or our clients, but our suppliers, ourselves, our neighbors. And we can have these kind of overarching concepts of community. You know, I am great for the community. But if we start to measure data, that's where we see actually how we're interacting with the community and what difference we're really making, and if that difference is a positive one, and if we're helping for that community to regenerate or for sectors of society to find their place. So yeah, I'm a kind of big believer in take stock of where you are, begin to measure the data, and let the statistics tell you if you're on track. And not let your kind of ego and your concept of how the world should be tell you if you're on track.
Yeah, I think I might just take a contrary view, a little contrary view, just to stimulate the discussion. The world right now is utterly awash in data about how bad things are and how things need to change. And yet we're still not acting on it. So I just wonder, I'm not saying that we don't need to measure certain things, and certainly it provides that feedback loop that the Bill was talking about and you were talking about. You know, we constantly need to, as living systems and living systems, we do need to adjust. But again, part of our current paradigm is to place as a primary input, if you like, is quantitative data. So it's all about measuring. You know, if you can give it a number, then it's real, it's okay. We are far more than rational beings. We have, you know, we have the physical sense of senses. We have emotional antennae that can sense whether the other person is healthy or happy or doing well, or whether your garden is flourishing, for example. We are taking in all kinds of different types of data that can't always be quantified. And if we just focus on the word data, I would argue right now is associated with numbers. What we actually, part of this, and I'm not negating you, it's more a question of emphasis. Part of what regeneration does, I think, it begins to make us much more aware of our connectivity with each other, our interdependence, and to develop a much more rounded approach, develop our emotional intelligence, develop our spiritual intelligence, recognize that we can be, in a sense, feeling how a plant is doing. And the scientific evidence is actually proving that they're constantly putting out energy that we can receive, we have receptors for. So I only think the worry I have at the moment is we're not recognizing that many of the questions that are being asked and the things that people are insisting upon, like prove to me with the data, are really hangovers of that very deeply embedded paradigm. And there are other ways in which we can be sensing the progress we're making. I'll let Bill tell the story about, how in the end you recognize that Playa Viva was having an impact. What was the outcome? So I'll let you tell that story because I think it's really important.
Yeah, and Beks, I feel like Beks ought to get a word in edgewise here before I answer that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, let Beks have a go.
So no, I'm loving hearing that whole conundrum of, should we be very, very much data driven in terms of informing our decisions and our actions, or is the world overly saturated with data? At what point do we, just even at a human level that is conceivable by the average person, how do we see signs and use our imagination through sort of our natural senses in terms of what are we actually doing, or what have we achieved with the practices that we're so well bent on actually doing? And I think both are very important. I mean, we established our foundation 16 years ago, and literally some of the practices that we've put in place, we're only beginning to see what the impacts of those things are. And if we are to continue on those, the questions we're asking ourselves is that, what are those practices really sustainable in this day and age because of the amount of time that it's taken us to be able to see the results? Is there another way of doing this? That data is very important. At the end of the day, our anti-poaching units, how many elephants have we stopped from being poached? Some of our programs on the ground with lion guardians, how many lions have been shot as a result of human-wildlife conflict? What are the things that we have done that have produced results, and what do those results actually look like? And I think it's very important that people understand what those results are, and that is only achievable through data. But I think it goes far beyond that. There is also a whole cultural element of it that we dive deep into and start to question. Okay, so we've achieved the fact that the land has become more productive. People growing their crops are no longer clearing vast tracts of fields. They're now being a lot more efficient in the land that they grow because of a practice of bringing in their cattle and bomering them in one place and then moving them from field to field. Okay, so that's great. What has that done to them culturally? What does it mean for the neighbor? What does it mean for the community in terms of really people plugging back into what communities were all about, which was about communing and sharing and gathering together and sharing? You know, so there's a lot more than that meets the data, but the data certainly goes quite a long way in being able to tell the full story. And I guess that's where we are as a foundation, in saying that really where we are today and where we want to go to is far much deeper than just the practice, because I think the world today is very focused on the practice, but without the thought of what the return is on the investment of that practice, which is regeneration.
This is great. I'd like to coalesce this into, I think, what we're talking about is paying attention. Data is important. Data is important for that. Experience is important to that. Subjective reaction and how people are responding is obviously important to that. And look at the United States right now, kind of the weird situation we're in, and in terms of people's perception of reality. So one of the early articles on impact investment in the 1970s defined impact measuring in 3 domains. And this is germane to our conversation: outputs, outcomes, and impact. And we measure outputs. That's pretty much that's very quantitative. In all the rating systems out there, green rating systems are measuring outputs. Outcomes are what happens, whether they're expected or unexpected, unintended consequences, and they may take 2 to 3 to 5 years to emerge. If you're not paying attention to those, you can't respond. And impact was defined as that which you cannot anticipate. And we prefer the word effect, but nonetheless, life is a complex system, and unless we are paying attention both subjectively and objectively, we will miss all sorts of cues. So what in Playa Viva, just to put a period on that kind of subtle subjective side, the outcome that was unanticipated but profound was that teenagers were moving back into this little village. Well, that's gigantic, but we never anticipated being able to predict that at all. But by paying attention to it, that you didn't need, well, yes, you can check the census forms and maybe see the data. That's great, but when teenagers are showing up and they're sticking around, good, done with that one, and you interview them. So another one last point: there are no such thing as best practices. There are only better practices. So that's the kind of thing. Again, paying attention. Okay, I'm complete.
Well, yeah, can I just add a little bit to that best practice? I'm always asked, can you give me an example of best practice? When I've just spent, half an hour talking about the uniqueness of each place. And this is hard for people because, again, we've come out of that paradigm, and all I'm trying to do here is just raise awareness of how rigid that old paradigm can be, where everything is measured against a standard. And you therefore think that if that standard worked here, you can work it there. It's affected our approach to what success is. If you've got a really great idea for a really cozy coffee shop, then you should replicate that. And like Starbucks, and have several thousand of them. That's success, but it's all somewhat related to this notion of quantity as well. And I've lost my thread now when thinking about Starbucks, but I think your idea of output, outcomes, and impact, that's very, very helpful. Every place is unique, every person is unique. And one of the wonderful things about regeneration in tourism is that it does enable us to focus on what makes a place unique and work together in community to express that in its many facets, because every person in that community is going to express it slightly differently. So it leads to a huge palette for creativity.
Thank you, Anna. And actually, Beks, tourism in Africa has been long regarded as inherently been practicing regenerative travel as part of its DNA. Community inclusion and partnership is a fundamental part of regenerative practice, and it's a core principle. What's the biggest lesson you've learned with African bush camps in terms of developing relationships with the communities that you work with?
Amanda, it's COVID over this period of the last 8 to 10 months. We are starting. I mean, we've seen it all along in terms of how we've had the ability, or at least how the communities have received us in the areas that we operate. So in all the areas that we operate, we generally, through the foundation, try to focus in two areas. One is a community aspect of it, and the other, of course, is a conservation aspect of it. But as you know, conservation and community really go hand in hand, pretty much the same as sustainability and regeneration. And the biggest thing for us, I think that's come to light, is the amount of investment that we've put in terms of time, resources, into building relationships with people in the communities in order to achieve some of our conservation efforts has probably been some of the biggest payoffs in terms of our practices, because without that investment in those communities and building those relationships, we would have not been able to carry out the number of projects that are now starting to bear fruit, where we can see the regeneration as part of the reward for our sustainable practices. During this period of time of COVID-19, where we've had to sometimes scale down on some of those projects, where we've had some of our staff members who are, by the way, part and parcel, a part of those communities, because we regard ourselves in terms of our business as part of that community where we operate. And so the embracing and the support and the understanding that we've received, whereas in some cases there could have been animosity. But just that power of collaboration with those communities has really meant that we've been able to carry out so many practices that we can now today call them as our true partners and say, what has actually gone wrong? What are the positives? What are the things that we've got right that we must continue? And what do we need to do to actually tweak them? And the answers has come from the communities themselves. So we are at that pivotal stage with our foundation of asking the hardcore questions, and in some cases, heartbroken, actually having to drop certain projects because we don't believe they're sustainable, or we don't believe that they're achieving the regeneration that we set out thinking that might achieve. And that kind of reward really comes from an enormous amount of investment into building relationships so that you can be the trusted partner that is fully embraced and allowed to be able to come in and make a fundamental difference within a community. And that's really what we've seen come out, especially for us over the last 8 to 10 months.
Thank you, Beks. Portia, would you like to add anything related to how you work with the communities and partnership?
I mean, I've always been quite wary of kind of using the word community, and I like to think of the fact that if someone moved to my village in England, like my mother did 45 years ago, they become a part of the community no matter what their origin is. And I'm very aware of the fact that when those of us from the first world move to the developing world, we tend to kind of consider community as something outside of ourselves. And we like to talk about ourselves as being expats, whereas when somebody moves the other way, they're immigrants. And so I've always made almost a conscious effort to just treat the community around me as my own community and ask them to treat me the same. And we kind of have a running joke with the local town council that in 5 years I'll be able to apply to be the mayor of the local village because I'll have been there for 10 years and I'll qualify. We have tried to treat everybody with respect in the exact same way as we would do if I were operating a business in France or in London. And as a result, we've seen our neighbours treat us with respect. And we've had, this is on a very practical, hands-on level, people say to us, you know, how come you guys don't have armed security at your beach club? And you don't have barbed wire fencing, and you also have no instances of people breaking in and stealing stuff. And I'm like, well, maybe it's because the fact that we aren't trying to lock everyone out means that they feel welcome enough to come in, and that we're not trying to kind of keep things. And we focus quite hard on, you know, spending our money locally and, being a contributive member of the local community. So I wouldn't say that I've gone into it perhaps with the academic rigor that Anna and Bill might do. I very much kind of pitched up and just tried to treat everybody like a human and ask them to treat me like a human. And we've now had some.
That's good, Portia. Keep it up.
We've actually had a really interesting conversation with our local village council recently, where they've come to us and said, we feel like we've lost a lot of our culture. We feel like nothing to do with tourism, but because we were actually the first hotel there, we feel like our kids don't really know about local dance, local music, local cooking skills, local woodworking skills. And we're seeing that foreign tourists coming in keep asking us, like, what's a traditional dance? What's the traditional drum sound like? And we're seeing that there's an opportunity for us to rediscover what we might have lost, and actually use tourism as a tool for that, because your customers are the ones that are asking us for it. And it's actually really nice to now see, the village come to us and say, can you guys help us put together a program where we actually as a community go back to discovering some of the cultural elements that we might have lost? And for our kind of American or French tourists to be a part of that, I think from observing it, seems like a really positive step.
Thank you, Portia. And Anna, luxury, whether in the form of travel or goods, is often aspirational. Can you speak a little about how regeneration is aspirational in nature?
Well, it is very much aspirational, because it's, and I like the aspirational in nature. I think if we look at nature, nature is aspirational. It's constantly yearning to evolve and grow. This is what drives every aspect of life. And so it wants to become more. We are not just human doings or human beings, we're actually human becomings. And you look at life and how it has evolved over 3.8 billion years. That's what I think is inspiring, is that we shouldn't assume either that there is some static endpoint when we become either sustainable or regenerative. We're always going to be adjusting to the circumstances and trying to make them better. So yeah, does that answer the question? I mean, I think that's what I find inspiring about regeneration, is that it enables each of us individually, and it applies to businesses, and it applies to places. Not only are we each unique, but we have our own unique potential. It's built into us. Even an acorn has within it this potential to become this phenomenally large ecosystem of an oak tree. That to me is the aspirational part, because it gives so much latitude for expressing and realizing that potential.
Thank you, Anna. Bill, would you like to add anything to that?
It means you're never done. No, sorry, I just was thinking.
We're never done. Yeah.
You're never finished. And there was a question about data and statistics, and I feel like I should sort of just go back to that. I think the reason that there might have been, and this is really inspired by what Anna said, there's no consensus on, how do we define something as being sustainable or regenerative? And I think that's because if you use the data as a goal that once you've reached it, you stop, it's not serving the purpose. So the idea is really to think aspirationally, right, okay, well, if yesterday I diverted 25% of the waste that my business produces from landfill, and that meant that I qualified to be in the, have a sustainable sticker on my website, the idea is not to stop at 25%. The idea is tomorrow to try to get to 26% and 27%. And it's one of the reasons that our businesses have actually never gone for certification, because I don't think you can ever be certified as being good enough. There's always a better way of doing things. As David from Playa Viva says, once you're off grid completely, how can you generate power for your local community so that they're off grid too? We're never done. That's the aspirational side for me.
Yeah, that's very well put.
Could I maybe just add a little bit into what Portia just said? And I fully embrace, certification can be a very subjective thing that always looks good on your website and various sort of marketing platforms. But certainly for us, what we find has been very helpful when we talk about aspiration. It really is about saying, where do I want my organization, or where do we want to be in terms of our practices in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? And sometimes signing up to a certain certification or certain membership means that what you're actually doing is you're saying, I'm not quite where I want to be, but I'm declaring that in 5 years' time, this is where I want to be. And what it does is it allows us as a community to actually hold each other accountable. Because without that, who are you being held accountable to? And can we go back and say, okay, Beks, this is what you said 5 years ago. Where are you with that? So I think there's a portion of that which certainly for us, we think is worth considering. And it's very much along the same principles of all of us as regenerative travel experts, as it were. I mean, I remember it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, we sat in Marrakesh, Dave, Amanda, and a whole group of us, discussing this whole subject of getting together. And truly we can audit ourselves and say, and ask the hard questions to say, are you really practicing what you preach? You know, where were you 2 years ago and where do you intend to be in a few years' time? So I think that's quite an important aspect of fundamentally what we should be doing as our organization as part of the aspirations.
Thank you, Beks. Bill, were you going to add something as well?
Probably, but.
Well, I think I have a question for everyone, actually. You know, for anyone that's just looking to start their regenerative journey, where can we begin? You know, maybe you already have a hotel, you have a travel business or a travel operator, or even a travel agent. You know, what is the next step to begin this journey?
I'll take a stab at that because I think that fits in with this question 6. We have a bunch of questions here, folks. That regeneration is described as a mindset and mental framework to achieve collaborative relationship with nature rather than a means to an end. So what do we do as a business to actually realize that? And how do we get buy-in from stakeholders? So the first thing in order to, that we do when we go into any community is we look for the potential of the larger system to be healthy and whole. Those are kind of redundant. Whole and healthy are the same thing. So by not focusing on problems, but by looking at potential, just like every child has potential, every living system has potential. And so by looking at the patterns, things that we've occluded and bulldozed over or ignored or destroyed inadvertently, they can be brought back. Life will express itself. That's the wonderful thing about living systems. We don't have to do much. We just have to kind of get out of the way and give it some support. So if we can help people see that potential of the health of a city and an ecosystem or wherever your spot of business is, that helps people with any interest. It might be climate change, it might be gender equity, it might be habitat connectivity, it might be, well, you know, all the isms, mobility, all those issues are typically siloed. But if you can get all those siloed interest areas, stakeholders, to be focused on the potential, they begin to work together. And then it's a practice to begin to help people support them in exchanging and getting out of their silos. And that's when things really take off. I hope that I've compressed an awful lot of that. Was that coherent?
Very.
Okay.
Very. Thank you, Bill.
I'll stop there.
Anyone else like to share maybe a practical next step to begin a regenerative journey? I'll ask you, Anna.
Yeah, go Anna, actually.
Well, I think when it comes to practical, I'd look to Portia because you're doing it. I'm thinking about it. So, but I think what Bill says is really relevant. Once you start bringing people into a community and giving them license, in a sense, an opportunity to dream together, to think together. I look at the work of people like Rob Hopkins from the Transition Town movement and how he's really spending a lot of his time and energy working with people to develop their imagination. What would this place look like if it could be the place we want it to be? And what that does also is it releases aspects of ourselves which have been suppressed, I think. You know, we often think we've been led to believe that we need experts to fix our problems. We're problem oriented, as Bill rightly says, and we think we need specialty experts to tell us what to do. But we're not actually spending enough time imagining a world that's different. And once you start to do that, that to me is an aspect of realizing the potential. But Portia, what's your experience? Because I think you're doing this.
I think I've got a sort of a philosophical one, which is maybe not that practical, which is just, I think we can all go away and ask ourselves, and I know there are questions coming up, not just from business owners, but also from travelers themselves. You know, how can I do this in a kinder or a more considerate or a fairer way? And then I've got one thing that really, we've talked about the paradigm shift, and I think, for example, Anna is much further along the shift than some of us. And I like the word shift because it implies that this is a process. It's not binary. We're not switching from an old paradigm to a new paradigm overnight. We can't. And I think that there are some tools that help those of us who've been born into this paradigm and have been kind of brainwashed by it. And for me, a real turning point was just to read the book Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, that gives you a completely different but very anchored in view of capitalism and how it could shift. And then on a practical level with your business, this is a toolkit which we're using now. And even if you decide not to complete the journey, sign up to B Corps and do the assessment. It's about 100 questions, I think. And those questions ask you how you run your business. They don't judge. They don't say you should do this or you should do that. They just ask you, what are you doing? And we've found by setting up in our business ecosystem, a committee of people from different departments to go through that list of questions and ask them and look at the way we do things. That has been a very practical way to kind of help us begin to make a shift. Now, none of these three things have used the word regeneration or talked about ecosystem or environment. But I find that if you stop sometimes focusing on the end goal and you focus on how you're thinking, that will affect what you're doing, and that will then affect the end goal. And if you're thinking in a way that is whole systems driven, which is what Donut Economics and B Corps is all about, and then you're acting according to those thoughts, then you will very slowly, probably, little by little, find that the outcomes and the outputs and the impacts that you're having will be moving in the right direction. And then, you know, obviously we signed up to Regenerative and got really involved and talked about everything we did. And in talking, we learned. So I would say also just do what you can, be 1% better today than you were yesterday. Be proud of that. Don't beat yourself up over being 99% rubbish. Don't let the big data get you down. Focus on what's good, share it with other people, and try to swap ideas, not best practices maybe, but see what works for others and see if that can work for you and vice versa. And be willing to make mistakes. We've made many, mostly financial, but always something that we've learned from, and it's just the great MBA of life, just outside of an academic institution.
So I quite like that, Portia, and you touched on quite a few points there that resonate with me as a property owner. Just in terms of being able to, from our point of view, having walked down this road, is to be able to share with others and bring others along in the journey and being inclusive. And I think just very simple practical steps for anyone who is interested in regenerative travel and being part of that whole community is to start having the conversations. You know, a lot of people look at it and see Mount Everest in front of them and say, you know, I've got to create almost an entire organization. I need to do this and that. But actually, all you need to do is have a conversation, because the chances are there's somebody who's walked that road and walked that track and is passionate enough about it. I think we all are, that will share that information and take people along with us. You know, this notion, particularly I've seen it over during this period of COVID, one of the things that I've been very impressed with is how peer-to-peer competitors have started having these conversations. How can we do things better? What is the best and most efficient way of looking at something? How can we collaborate? And that power of collaboration in today's world is something that I think we could all fundamentally make a very big difference, because we don't operate in isolation. And when we talk about a healthy whole system, we're talking about an entire travel industry, we talk about an entire community, and not just us as individuals. So I think very practical steps is to have that conversations with your neighbor. And it sounds like, Portia, you're doing a great job of that within your community. So well done.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Beks and Portia. And actually, since we have 10 minutes left, I'm going to get to some of our wonderful Q&As that are coming in. I think there's a couple questions I'll tie into one around how do we measure qualitative growth, and can we give any examples of how regenerative initiatives are being measured for travelers to get a better understanding of what regenerative travel is? Ask you, Portia, since standing there.
Well, I think it's important to differentiate, and Anna's done it a couple of times, between qualitative and quantitative. I don't know how to measure qualitative. I know that I feel happy when I learn that we sent less waste to landfill. But I also know that I feel happy when I look at a beautiful landscape that's not marred by trash. I don't know how we can measure qualitative, but I think that travelers specifically can look at the values of companies. I know that certification, is there, and I agree with what Beks says, that often certification is a way of us making a commitment and making ourselves accountable in the public sphere. But certainly when I travel now, I don't look for a sticker or a badge. I read the website, I look at the Instagram, I see what words they use. I see if something says we're a sustainable hotel, and then every single person in their Instagram who's a client is white. And I go, maybe these guys haven't really grasped the idea of what sustainability and regeneration mean. So from my point of view, it's, as a traveler, unfortunately, there might still be a bit of work to do. You have to do your research, pick up the phone, ask your friends, look at companies that you admire, and don't be necessarily so guided by certifications, although certifications can give you a great idea as to how a company is doing. I think you have to also read their material and look at what they're putting out there to see if they're really walking the walk that they're talking.
Bill?
I'd like to address the qualitative side of things. And Portia, your example about not having to have security at your property is an example of a qualitative measurement. You've measured social cohesion by a proxy criteria. And no, I'm serious. That's how this happens. It can be done through surveys too. We have developer friends of ours who have massively profitable properties because they intentionally develop social cohesion in their community, and the turnover rates are drastically reduced. The maintenance costs are drastically reduced. You can measure those as indicators of social cohesion. And that is also, again, you can't measure everything. And so what you can pay attention to are the systemic issues. So water quality, are we reducing the biological oxygen demand criteria, the nitrogen, the phosphorus in our waterways? Okay, that's something you can quantify. What's the real purpose of that though? And you have to go downstream, literally downstream or upstream. Are the salmon or the trout returning to spawn in those rivers? That's the point. So that's an indicator of quality all around, but from a quantitative measurement. But it means you have to pay attention over time. So that's that output outcomes impact. Pay attention over time, and you'll learn what to measure, as well as starting with the initial outcome, the initial quantitative ones that'll get you started, like B Corp or whatever. I'll stop.
Thank you, Bill. I have a question from Laura Field. Often the most sustainable regenerative travel options aren't the most economical. How can travelers on tighter budgets still play a part and help to contribute to their ecosystems?
Amanda, it's a good question, but I do believe that it doesn't matter which part of the world you go to, there will always be something for everyone's budget. I know, so we're in high-end travel, but we're in high-end travel, not necessarily because we've got, the shiniest properties or the most elaborate properties. We're in high-end travel because of the quality of the experience that we offer. But certainly there are properties that I know that charge 1/10 of what I charge in our camps. And they are doing their fair bit in getting all their guests involved in sustainable practices, and they do things properly. They go out of their way to recycle, they go out of their way to really make a very big difference in the communities in which they serve. And it is still possible to have that kind of impact. And it's not about budget. I think it's about doing that research. And in a sense, one of the things that we've been talking about in our sort of travel circles is that we're moving into a shift now where people in travel, travel professionals and travel advisors, it's a responsibility for us to educate customers. Why are you booking people, or why are you booking these clients into Beks's camps? Is there a fundamental reason from a sustainable or contribution level to the well-being of this planet? And it goes about not just making the sale. It goes about educating the customer as to what difference it's going to make to the environment, to the communities where you're actually going to travel. And what that does is sensitize that client so that by the time they get onto the ground, they're able to have a far much deeper and meaningful experience on the ground, and maybe even contribution and in the end have a sustainable long-term partnership in whatever that operator is doing to contribute to the well-being of the planet. So I think it's definitely a possibility. There is something for everyone, particularly in this part of the world. We've seen it in our industry, and it doesn't always have to be on a high-end scale.
Thank you, Beks. Let's see, another question that just came in is, actually, Portia, do you want to touch upon this one that's directed towards you? If you don't think you've already answered it, you know, there are a number of impact measuring companies such as Sustainalytics, Bloomberg, and there's a recent paper that showed that none of these companies are in closed agreement of the ratings. How do you think that we can improve this and drive better decision making?
I mean, I think we've already touched on that, and you know, we've talked about the fact that if we're trying to set standards, we'll never agree because everybody will always measure success differently. So I think my answer to that would be to focus on the approach, the way of thinking, and yeah, the baseline approach rather than focusing on the end result.
Thank you. And just as we're wrapping up, we'll do a rapid quick fire round of what would you each like to see there? What would you each like to see in the regenerative movement in the next decade? Bill?
I don't know how to answer that. I would say keep improving. The focus needs to be on life and not on rating systems. So focus on the places and understand the places we are working, and understand that organism as someone you have to care for, and not care for that's reciprocal. It's a reciprocal relationship between people and place. And I want to say abandon the mechanical worldview, but we're not going to do that right away. So become indigenous again might be the other way to say that. So I'll stop there.
And Anna, maybe in the context of your work with destinations.
I'll pick up on that. I think right now it's fascinating to me that so many of the questions are all about measurement, which again is an indicator that we don't have the courage of our own inner knowing that things are wrong. We don't need more data to get us to start focusing on, I know that sounds like it's a problem obsession, but we are in a difficult position. The conversations that I would like to see happening more is, you know, who are we as human beings? What is our role here? You know, get to the fundamentals. Why is it that we are so fixated on more all the time? What is more? You know, what is really making us feel more human? What is making us flourish? It's interesting because for the first several years of my work in this space, for want of a better word, I never used the word regeneration. We talked about, you know, moving off volume growth for a destination, and how the role of the destination marketing organization was to be part of a collective initiative to help a destination flourish. We said, well, what's flourishing? And the beautiful thing about flourishing is it applies to individuals and it applies to life forms, all life forms. But it opened up a lot of conversations. It also recognized that, you know, there are so many other dimensions to knowing apart from just the rational unit of measurement type of knowing. So I'd love to see an opening up. I'd like to see regenerative initiatives and practices engaging people in the arts and in culture and in theater, so that we start to loosen up and realize that this is not a quantitative game at all.
Thank you, Anna. Actually, yes, Portia will get to that. Beks, would you like to share where you'd like to see the regenerative movement go in the next decade?
I think what I'm finding more and more is probably some of the most important practices that we can do is to be able to think strategically, collaboratively with the people around us that are in travel. You know, the days of keeping information close to your chest because it benefits you and because you'll be able to talk about it and you look good. I think those days are gone. Those days are over. And what I'm particularly excited about is seeing how in the next 5 years, competitors can sit around a table and really speak the same language and recognize that actually we're all are really chasing after the protection of the same asset, the same planet, the same resource, and we should all really get on the same page. There's so much more traction that we as human beings can make by being able to collaboratively look at regeneration and say, this is something that we all want and we all need. And we can't operate as islands. We have to look at the whole system. When we talk about the whole system, we also are talking about the attitudes of human beings, talking about that paradigm shifts. So it's not just the physical aspects of other things outside of us that are a part. We are part of that whole system. And I think there's a lot more work that we're starting to see, and there's a lot more work that we can see in the future through collaboration.
Thank you, Beks. And Portia, I'll ask you the same question. Also, if you can maybe ask one of our questions from the audience on, the general notion of air travel is deeply regenerative in nature. How do you see the active modern air travel as it stands in the future? And also, what is your long view?
I think the two tie into each other, actually. I'm going to give a practical answer to the next 10 years. And I'm going to say that I would like to see the girls who are starting out their careers with me and my businesses today, in the next 10 years, go on to be owners and leaders in their own businesses. And I'd like those girls to be girls from the village down the road from Blue Apple. And I will tie that in to air travel, because air travel, of course, is degenerative. We know that. But I think if you read Drawdown, air travel comes quite far down the list of causes of the climate crisis. And one of the things that's easy to do is to kind of box things up in black and white. This is bad and this is good. One of the actions that we can take, or the changes that can happen in our society that will have a huge impact on climate change, is the emancipation and freedom and education of girls and women, enabling women all over the world to make choices about who and when they marry, if they marry, and how many and if they go on to have children. And when you have, as we've seen in 2020, in a country like Colombia, no air travel, so you're relying entirely on a domestic market, there isn't enough income flow to generate jobs for all the women and girls who would like to work and would like to have independent and free lives. And so I would advocate that sometimes taking a trip to a country and spending your money there and doing that once a year and doing it well, and being a part of enabling people to have opportunities that they might never otherwise have had, and to then go on to make choices about their life, you can actually have a more positive impact than you might imagine by just, oh, I took a flight and that flight was degenerative and now I'm a bad person. Now, I am not advocating for Ryanair and EasyJet and all of us flying 50 times a year wherever we feel like it, but I think that sometimes what we think of as being negative can actually have a profoundly positive consequence. And for the moment in Colombia, we still need people to come in from overseas. And I still want all those girls that are working for us to have careers that are stable and long-term. And I want to see them bossing their own businesses. And Amanda, next time you do one of these panels in 10 years, I want you to not have to struggle to find brown women to get on them.
Well said. Well, thank you all so much. I know we've run just a little bit over, but I hope you all enjoyed our wonderful conversation with these incredible experts. I'm going to share my screen as we wrap up so you can also see their contact information in case you want to get in touch. Please do download our white paper in case you haven't already. It's at regenerativetravel.com/principles/white-paper, and you can get further insights from all our wonderful panelists today. Thank you all so much for joining, and we will see you next month.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Amanda. Terrific.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Bye.
Well done.